What's up, everybody? Jay Sandler here with a Rangers Q&A. Really excited to talk some Rangers baseball with you, answer some questions. We already have some questions that have been submitted and going to hopefully answer some new questions as well. If you've got a question and you haven't submitted one already, go ahead and add it to the chat here to the left. Would obviously love to answer your questions. Want to thank everyone for questions, be it on Reddit or Twitter, what have you. So let's get started here. First of all, we got a question from Josh about anything. Don't feel like it has to be trade deadline specific. But Josh wants to know, how big of a factor do you think the shortened season will play in the quality of return teams will get back in a trade, more or less likely to part with pieces for a shot at contention? I think this has evolved, and it was something that I shared probably 2-3 weeks ago, back when there wasn't nearly as much optimism that the season would get completed. You're on the heels of the Marlins and the Cardinals, and all that stuff going down, and now you're wondering, like, gosh, I mean, is the season going to end before it even gets halfway through? I think there's a lot more optimism and a lot more confidence that there is going to be a finish line. And so there was at one point, I think, a mental hurdle in the minds of GMs. Like, I don't want to make a trade for a guy and then have the season shut down, a week later. You don't get refunds on those deals. Now I've lost prospects, and the guy I got is a free agent at the end of the year, and I ended up getting fleeced. So, that I don't think that is as present of a concern. I still think that's a possibility, but not as present of a concern. The teams that are in, they're in it, like the Yankees, the Dodgers, the A's. These teams aren't messing around. They're not taking, this season doesn't really count, so whatever happens, they're going for it. The unique dynamic here is, one, to what capacity can teams take on salary now compared to maybe where they were heading into the season? Because contending teams oftentimes go into a season with some space and whatever their internal salary cap is. Obviously, there's no official salary cap, but whatever their internal salary cap is, they leave some space to where, if they need to take on contracts in a trade, they can do that. I don't know to what degree that still exists. There are also more teams that are going to make the playoffs. So in theory, you'd think there'd be less sellers and maybe not as much of a market. So I guess the question is, for the Rangers, and we already have Daniel here asking about a Lance Lynn package. We got a few others who obviously are curious about that. Well, let's just, before we get into the Lance Lynn package, let's take Lance Lynn just as an example here. The Rangers don't have to trade Lance Lynn. This is not a Yu Darvish situation where they just basically had to take the best offer on the table. They don't have to trade Lance Lynn. They can trade him in the offseason. They can trade him next deadline, or they don't have to trade him at all, I guess. They've got a little more leverage. I don't know if the market is going to develop in a way where, let's say the Rangers need a team to get here to make a deal. I don't know if the market is going to allow for deals to get there or above. It might not. I just don't know. But I do think that the unique dynamic certainly changes things. Now, I will tell you that rentals going to be a lot tougher to move. Let's take Mike Minor. He'd be a rental. He's a free agent at the end of the year. You're getting, 3-4 starts out of him? And then maybe in the playoffs, if he's good enough to make your playoff rotation. So, the rentals are a lot tougher to move. Guys who have some control going to be a little easier. I just don't know if we're going to see any big names traded. At the same time, like, you go into the trade deadline, you never quite know what exactly is going to go down. I will tell you this. I firmly believe the Rangers are engaged in a lot of conversations involving Lance Lynn and Joey Gallo. All right, Daniel wants to know about a Lance Lynn package. Jeffrey also wants to know, specifically with the Dodgers, could they get Brusdar Graterol and maybe DJ Peters or Dane Dunning and Zach Bertie from the White Sox? Perhaps you got Jorge Mateo and Hudson Potts from the Padres. So I don't know that any of those deals would be super compelling for me. Like DJ Peters for the Dodgers doesn't really do a whole lot for me. Brusdar Graterol would be interesting. I don't think the Dodgers would part with Brusdar Graterol. They really haven't shown a desire to part with those guys. I know that, he was initially going to be in the Mookie Betts trade, but I don't know that, I don't know that Brusdar Graterol is a guy that they would part with. If you think of the Dodgers and the moves they've made, Mookie Betts is a franchise player. Lance Lynn's not a franchise player. So Brusdar Graterol came over in the Mookie Betts deal. He was in it, and then he was out of it, and then it became a separate trade. It was all sorts of messed up. He came over from the Twins. It's possible, but I'm not sure if that's a guy the Dodgers would part with. As far as Dane Dunning, I don't think the White Sox are parting with Dane Dunning. And then the Padres deal, I don't really have much desire in Jorge Mateo and Hudson Potts. That wouldn't do it for me. But I think, listen, if you can get Dane Dunning, all right, yeah, let's talk. If you can get Brusdar Graterol, let's talk. Here's what I think the Rangers need to consider doing. And it's not the sexiest thing that's going to have the most positive reviews immediately, but it's the type of move that ultimately, when all is said and done, probably pays the biggest dividends. So we're in an era where prospects are more highly coveted and valued than ever before. All right, a team's willingness to give up one of their 5 best prospects has shrunk, in a huge way. And once a guy has elevated himself to that status and is in Double-A, whatever level of desire teams have to part ways with a top 5 prospect shrinks even more. Because at that point, they're one step away, and teams are valuing prospects, as we mentioned, in a way that, over the last 5 years is unique to baseball as we knew it. Plus, with whatever financial constraints teams might have because of COVID, I think they might rely more on these controllable players. Where you can really make a move is guys who maybe haven't touched Double-A yet. Maybe guys who haven't even come stateside yet, guys who've played in the Dominican Summer League. And those guys could be, ultimately as good as some of the best prospects in your system, but because they haven't done it at a high enough level, they don't get the type of publicity. Now, if you're the first overall pick, you're going to be a top 5 prospect in a system before you even play a professional game. But what about, let's take Fernando Tatis, as an example. He got the 27th highest bonus in his international signing class from the White Sox. The White Sox then traded him to the Padres for James Shields. And one of the reasons why that deal made sense to them at the time was, one, Fernando Tatis was like 16, 17 years old. The idea of him being a big leaguer in the next couple of years just at that time wasn't really fathomable. He was probably in their minds 5, 6, 7 years away. And then obviously didn't become the case, but a part of the reason why he was able to beat that timeline is because he got a lot better when he was 17, 18, 19. There's a ton of development to be had. I'm not saying you got to go for 16-year-olds, but you've got to try and find, you got to roll your sleeves up, dig in and scout and try find guys that maybe haven't been identified yet as studs. And I've used this example a lot here recently. I'll use it again. 2012, 2013, Jurickson Profar was considered the top prospect in baseball. The Rangers also had Luis Sardinas, who was coveted, and then they had Hanser Alberto. He was, he's nice shortstop. The guy who's going to end up having the best career of the 3 of them is Hanser Alberto. The guy who was, untouchable is Jurickson Profar. But, teams probably could have rolled up their sleeves and maybe found something at that time in Hanser Alberto. Those guys are there. Now, is Hanser Alberto a franchise-changing player? No. But if your odds, or if your standard is franchise-changing player, Lance Lynn's going to have a tough time bringing you back someone who's going to be a franchise-changing player, at least at a high probability. But everyday player who can be a really good player for you, an all-star player, those guys are there. They might not be ranked 5th in a team system. They might not be ranked in the top 10. But they could be 18 years old, getting ready for their first full season of minor league baseball with a ton of talent that's untapped, and you get them. Teams are more willing to part ways with guys who are not one step away from the big leagues. Those guys are there. And so I think what I've convinced myself might make the most sense is if the Rangers get a package of 3 or 4, 18, 19-year-old prospects who they just haven't really been discovered yet. And you're not just blindly picking these guys, but guys you've identified. You have put in the time, you've scouted and said, these guys are guys we think can really impact our franchise. That's the type of deal I'd want, because I don't know if the names that we know are going to be made available. The Adrian Morejones of the Padres. I don't think that guy is going to be made available. Grandma's Couch, yes, Profar for Stanton. That in hindsight would be cool. Josh, do you think the Rangers move Chu? The contract and age are an issue, but with the universal DH, you figure more teams should be interested. We also had a question about Shin-Soo Choo from someone else, from Saddest Clown on Reddit. What are the feelings about Chu going elsewhere to experience a playoff run at least one more time? If the NL sticks with the DH, he'd be a good on-base option. So, in theory, that's right. Both Josh and Saddest Clown on Reddit, they both have the right idea. Here's the problem with Shin-Soo Choo. He's at an age where when you have poor numbers, it's a lot tougher for teams to convince themselves that, oh, no, it's just a bad start. Because Chu is at an age where, a decline, seemed imminent. His on-base percentage last year of, 371 is not something you see for someone who, turned 38 in the middle of the season, or 37. He's now 38 years old. He has an on-base percentage barely over 300. He doesn't hit lefties, and he can't really play anywhere defensively. And I know that, they both identified the DH possibility, but typically you want more out of your DH. With all that said, could I see a contending team want to take Shin-Soo Choo on? Sure, but he probably would not be an everyday player for that team and might just be a guy off the bench. Not even a guy who starts against righties, maybe even a guy off the bench, and you're not getting much for those guys. So I could see it happen. It's possible. I just don't know how much value there is right now in Shin-Soo Choo with the way that his season has gone so far. Jason wants to know, would the Rangers get a bigger haul for Gallo or Lynn? That's a great question. And I don't know. I think if you polled the 29 other teams, or the GMs, I think you'd get a little bit of a split. I think some would say that I'd pay more for Lynn, others for Gallo. Ultimately, Gallo's got, the most upside long-term beyond the next couple years, right? The only problem is he's a free agent after the 20, so you got 2021, after 2022, and he's a Boris guy. I think right now, at this moment, for this, teams are making trades really with this season maybe as their primary focus. If that's their mentality, you might get more for Lynn. But after this season, you'll get more for Gallo. But I think that's such a toss-up. And I also think that Gallo's such a polarizing player. Certain teams, I bet, don't even have any interest in Joey Gallo. It's just he's not the type of player that they want. Other teams are like, this is exactly the type of player that we want. Whereas with Lance Lynn, no one's going to deny how great this guy's been. And I don't think a single team that's in need of starting pitching wouldn't say, I would love that guy. Now, they might not be willing to pay the price for him, but they would tell you, I would love that guy. Tobias, Lynn and Gallo for Lux. Who says no? The Dodgers say no. They don't need Gallo, and I don't think they have much interest in parting ways with Gavin Lux. Grandma's Couch, has Minor rebuilt his trade value a little bit? Well, I don't know. I'll say this. Yesterday didn't hurt. And maybe there's a National League team that is thinking about, their path to the World Series, going through the Dodgers, saying, hey, Dodgers struggle against lefties. Mike Minor looked pretty good against them. But I don't know that you're getting a haul or a package in return for Mike Minor that really excites you. Does that make sense? But yeah, I think teams took note for sure. First of all, hey, I'm going to continue asking questions. I want to pause. This has been awesome. Really appreciate you guys jumping on here. I love having these conversations. Keep the questions coming. And I'd really appreciate if you'd like or subscribe to the channel or just share this link. Let's get more people in the party to talk Rangers baseball. Trenton asked, again, how much value does Minor have? I know it's got to be night and day versus what last year would have been. Yeah, that's fair. Now, at the trade deadline last year, he didn't have a lot of value because he had such a horrible July leading up to the deadline. But prior to July 1 last year, he had quite a bit of value. But because he's a rental, and as we talked about earlier, maybe 3-4 starts out of him, he really doesn't have a whole lot of value. Even if he was pitching well, the value wouldn't really be that strong. All right. Tobias, do you think there's a chance Gallo isn't the superstar we all want? He's 26 and his best season's 250 with 22 homers. I don't know that Gallo's a guy that can be your best player on a World Series team. If Gallo hits 250 or if he's a 240 hitter, this is a perennial all-star. If you're expecting 270, 280, that's, this ain't your guy. And 240 even, I don't know. I would want him surrounded by some guys who have the ability to hit 280, 290. So I think he could be your best or most impactful player in the right lineup. But it's tough to build a lineup around a guy that is that streaky. But I think Gallo is going to be a multi-time all-star when all is said and done. I just don't know if he can be the alpha on a team that is a true World Series contender. For Tobias, maybe the Rangers aren't all in on giving him I don't think the Rangers are all in on giving Joey a massive contract. I think that they're happy to have talks with Scott Boras, but I don't think that they're going to just open up the bank for Gallo. They need to build up the middle, and Gallo's a corner player. There's nothing wrong with that, but they've got to be stronger up the middle, and adding up the middle is not cheap. Alan wants to know on Reddit, should the Rangers be targeting certain position upgrades or looking for the best available talent regardless? I think you're looking for the best available talent. I think maybe you wouldn't want to pigeonhole yourself with a guy who's like a DH only or can only play one position. As I mentioned, guys up the middle would be desirable. But, if you can get talent, you get talent and you figure out what to do with it. Jason, with Rugi struggles, any chance Solak moves back to second full time? Maybe this year, but not long term. He's not that good there. And you need to be better up the middle defensively. That's one of the challenges with Nick. He does a lot of things really well. Good at bats. He battles. He uses the whole field. Nick probably on a World Series team is hitting 7th, 8th, or 9th. And I think, what would be best is if he just improves in left field. He's never going to have a good enough arm. Or a great arm, I should say, but maybe his arm can be good enough and with improved footwork. The guy busts his tail, and so, he's the type of guy that you could see improvement for, but I don't know that Nick Solak's best position is second base. Maybe for this year, but not, if you're trying to look at the future, I don't know if that's the case. Akash, do you think they're more likely to just sit this deadline and make moves during the offseason, or do you think they'll at least make a move, even if a minor one? I'd be surprised if they didn't do something. Guys who are of interest, you got Minor and Lynn, who I'm sure teams would be interested in. Rafael Montero and Joely Rodriguez. Jonathan Hernandez will draw interest. I don't know if they'll move him. Joey Gallo will draw interest. And those guys will bring back varying degrees of packages. Maybe a player to be named later for Joely Rodriguez. I don't know. I think Joely could maybe yield a little more than that. The other thing to note here, by the way, guys, technically, you can only trade players that are part of your 60-man camp. So you might see some player to be named later moves, and it's a good player, but maybe that player, that prospect's not in the 60-man camp, so he can't be traded. Does that make sense? All right, Josh, who do you think JD do you think JD would be willing to put Young in a package with Lynn to get a bigger haul? I think it depends on the haul. I don't think that it's an absolute no, but I just think it depends on who you're getting. Do you think Texas is interested in trading Lynn and Montero to get a better? Yes, I think they're interested in doing any of that stuff. But again, it just depends on the return. I think they'll explore a lot of these things. All right. We got a question from Gordon. What would it take for Lynn to be moved, and who else has any value besides Lynn? So again, for Lynn to be moved, I don't know what their threshold is, but they're not just going to give this guy away. I think they'd want to get 2 or 3 prospects who they feel like could make an impact on the big league team, whether it's 2, 4, 6 years from now. Again, I just identified some of the other guys who could have value. Maybe Todd Frazier. A team needs a guy to hit lefties, start against lefties. Maybe Todd Frazier has some value as well. That's another name to consider in addition to the guys I've mentioned. All right, got a question from JSU on Reddit. The Rangers have a handful of guys that are 30-plus under contract for at least next year. Elvis, Kluber, Lynn, Gibson, Chirinos, Frazier, Lyles. They seem primed to have a young team going forward in a rebuild. Are these trade targets or do we just let all these options go? I don't know that anyone has any interest in Jordan Lyles right now with the way he's pitched. I mentioned Todd Frazier. Robbie's had a rough year. I don't know what sort of value he has. Gibson, I don't think the Rangers want to trade because I think they still, with Minor free agent to be and the possibility of trading Lynn, you still want to have a veteran in the rotation, and he would be a great guy to have. Lynn, obviously, yes, he could be moved. Kluber, not going to be moved this year, and I'd imagine that if he shows some level of health, they'll pick up his option. If not, he'll become a free agent. And I think the Rangers are trying to figure out what to do with Elvis. He might be a guy they add to a trade. Maybe they attach Elvis to Lynn and say, hey, you got to take on Elvis if you're gonna get Lance Lynn for us. That's just one way if the Rangers were keen on moving him. Cold Sprunk wants to know if you could identify the single biggest need for the club, what would it be and why? It could be a GM, a manager, ownership, position player, etc. I'll go back to building up the middle. Whether it's shortstop, center field, pitcher. I think there certainly needs in those departments. From Texas Hockey Fan, any news on potential prospect call-ups after the deadline and how it works with service time? So the service time is a prorated figure, and yes, I think you could see Anderson Tejeda again. I think you could see Josh Young. I think you could see Sam Huff. I think you could see Sherton Apostle. I think you could see DeMarcus Evans and Alex Spees. I can't guarantee it or anything. I just think that there's definitely a chance that you could see those guys for sure. I definitely think they're candidates. Pablo wants to know, will Jonathan Hernandez be looked at as a starter again later this season if the team continues to lose? I don't think so. I think that he's found a home as a very valuable reliever. Could be this team's closer. What if Jose Leclerc's shoulder thing doesn't heal right and he's not the same. And obviously, he didn't have an amazing year last year. I think that Jonathan Hernandez has closer type stuff and he struggled in the rotation. Now, could I see Jonathan Hernandez, maybe have something click and find something as a starter? It's possible. But I don't know if that's something that the Rangers are keen on doing right now. Maybe they re-examine it in offseason. I'll tell you this. I think, Taylor Hearn is a reliever. I think that's his home. I don't know that he'll go back to the rotation. I'd put the chance of Jonathan Hernandez going back at like 18%. So not likely, but still possible. And then Steve-O wants to know, what do you think will happen with Gallo and Lynn? It's so tough to predict. I do think the Rangers are having conversations with those guys. I don't think Gallo gets traded before the deadline, and I ultimately don't think Lynn does either. I think Lance Lynn gets traded in the offseason. I put that at 51%. That's my level of confidence, so it's a toss-up. Tobias, any type of prospects you're targeting, MLB ready, AAA, AA, single A. Again, it'd be great to have MLB ready super stud prospects. I just don't think those guys are getting passed out like Halloween candy, and I don't know that Lance Lynn is going to yield one of those guys. I don't even know if Joey Gallo is going to yield a super stud who's knocking on the door of the big leagues. I think that your best bet, if you want to maximize your potential for value, is you do some scouting, like I said earlier, and you find some guys in A-ball, maybe in short season, maybe in the Dominican Summer League, who they've got something. There's something that could be special there. But because they're, 2, 3, 4 years away from even being considered big league options, teams are more willing to part with those guys. That's just the nature of things. So I just want talent, but I think that more likely you're going to maybe have a deal that's centered around an A-ball player. I'd be shocked if you got a top 50 prospect who is near big league ready for Lance Lynn. Top 50 overall. Now, you might get a top 50 overall who's not a big leaguer just yet, but a guy who's near big league ready, if you can get that guy for Lance Lynn, that's a huge win. Josh, I bet there are a few teams calling on Solak as well. I don't think so. Right now he's a below average offensive player when you look at OPS, or right around league average. He doesn't really have a position. Remember, this guy was traded for Pete Fairbanks. I don't know that there's a ton of value. I think Nick Solak's best value is to the organization as a player, not as a trade chip right now. We got a few more questions here, and then we'll have to say goodbye for today. Jason wants to know, chances is he's the starting shortstop next year. I'd say they're quite decent. I don't know that he's the long-term option, but as a bridge, I think there's a possibility that he's in that role for sure. Venomous Stare, Jer, what sort of returns are being floated for Lance? I don't know. I haven't really, the rumors really aren't swirling because the scouts who very much, drive some of these rumors, they're not in action. They're kind of idle. So I haven't heard rumors necessarily for what a return could be. Tobias, do you think the front office overvalues their players? For example, not trading Minor last year. Don't want to make the same mistake with Lynn. Listen, at the end of the day, we don't know what offers there were for Mike Minor, but he had a year left on his contract, and the Rangers went into this year thinking that they had a three-headed monster in the rotation. It didn't work out that way, but they didn't want to give away Minor. And if you look at the deals that were made last year, it just didn't seem like there was a whole lot on the table for someone like Minor, who was fading. He had a horrible July, and it was tough for that to inject confidence in a team to go over the top to get that guy. Lynn has 200 innings and 200 strikeouts last year. I think it'd be a huge piece for a squad like the Brewers that needs starting help. Listen, he could be a huge piece for any team that needs starting help. Padres just gave up their 20th best prospect for Rosenthal. We need to do much better than that for Lynn. Absolutely. Also understand that the Padres system and other team systems are a lot different. Edward Olivares was blocked, and frankly, his stock is declining. He's not a number 20 prospect who's rising. He's a number 20 prospect who, maybe not declining, but it's idling, but, to me, kind of declining. Do I think there's a shot for Waters? I don't know. So, okay, Will's asking about, I imagine, Drew Waters. Again, it depends on, man. No, I don't. I don't, because I don't see the Braves, even though the only thing I was thinking about is, well, the Braves are so good in the outfield, but, right field could be a place of need for them, or maybe, center field, depending on how you want to play Acuna or left, whatever. No, I don't think that Drew Waters is an option. I don't. I wish, but I don't think so. All right, I'm going to take the two questions here, and then we'll call it a day. Do you think Gallo ever develop into an all-star slugger instead of a Walker Dong guy? Well, he was an all-star last year. If you're expecting a 270 batting average, it's not the right guy. I think he could be a guy who hits 240, 250, or maybe even 230 plus, but 230 with a lot of walks. But if you're looking for a guy who's going to be like a 260, 270 hitter, probably not your guy. Josh, can we send Rugi to Japan? Doubt it. Yeah, so, Will, that's a good question. I don't know what their threshold is for Lance Lynn, and I don't know that you're necessarily overvaluing him. But listen, I wouldn't be upset if they held him at a high standard and they're not just going to give him away, for sure. All right, that's going to do it. Hey, I got to get ready for the pregame show. Thanks so much. You guys are the best. We'll continue to do this, obviously, throughout the season. Going to share this link if you missed any part of it. Would really appreciate if you would consider subscribing to the channel. Talk to you guys later. Have a great day.